Welcome to the Denver Gazette Sports Podcast. I am your host, Chris Schmaedeke, and today we are brought to you by Applewood Plumbing, Heating, and Electric. They have been serving Denver residents for 50 years. They are the proud sponsor of the Colorado Avalanche, as well as this podcast. And today we're doing our Monday Colorado Rockies talk. And also, this podcast is not brought to you by Nike, but if you're watching the video on YouTube, you'll see that. I am joined by Luke Zahlmann to talk all things baseball. Luke, how are you?
You know what? It's a good day for the Rockies, so I guess it's a good day for me, right?
I was thinking about this today. For a team that's whatever games under 500, what is it now? Like, how many is it?
34 and
34?
63, I think,
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
They're not boring.
No, that's the thing. I even tweeted it out this year. I said, you know what? You can call the Rockies whatever you want. But you can never call them boring. Whether it's good or bad, it is never boring. It's always gonna get you to the edge of your seat somehow, for better or worse.
All right, so let's talk MLB draft. Started last night, goes on for the next 2 days. How many rounds are there? 30, something like that? Is that what it is?
I mean, it's insane. You got 3 through 10 today, and then you got the rest tomorrow. So you're talking last year they drafted 20 guys, so 14 pitchers. This year they've started a little different. So we'll have to see what the final numbers are this year.
Yeah, so you and I talked about them taking a pitcher with that third pick last week. That guy was taken second, Chase Burns from Wake Forest, right? Yeah, Wake Forest.
Yep.
Well, they went hitter, power hitter. So what do we know about Charlie Condon?
Yeah, they got the hitter. I mean, you had Bonanza, I believe, Banzana. It's hard to say his name, but he goes number 1 overall to Cleveland. And I understood what Cleveland was looking at. He's a really refined hitter. He's a really smart kid. But Charlie Condon was the hitter of the draft. And for the Rockies to get him at 3, a little surprising. When we talked to them last night, they said, okay, we had a 5-man group that we thought, okay, these guys are all worthy of that pick. We're going to get one of them. You had Caglanone was part of that. You had, I would assume, whatever his name is. I assume he was in there.
The guy who
Chase Burns was in there. I believe Nick Kurtz was in there too, the power hitter from Wake Forest. So they had some big names in that group. They got their number 1 guy though, and they were pretty elated after. It was a face of the franchise was kind of the talk. I mean, this is a 6'6" kid who just set the BB-Core record. And for those who don't know what that is, it's just a type of bat. They instituted a new type of bat. It deadened it a little bit. So he hit 37 homers, most ever with one of those bats. He led the nation in average too. So I believe he's one of 3 or one of 5 guys to ever do that, to lead in homers and average. So if you're looking for the profile of a top level hitter, I mean, this is as good of a dart throw as you can have in a draft that tends to be pretty hit or miss. But this one feels like a guy who's going to be a hit.
Well, and they went with another experienced guy. Like it doesn't feel like they're taking high schoolers as much anymore high in the draft. Like they want guys who have played college ball.
Yeah, 100%. And that was kind of a trend in the entire draft. There was a lot of college kids that went early and not a lot of high school. And I think what the Rockies saw, and they brought it up last night, a little bit of it is kind of what they saw with Jordan Beck. They said, we took this guy out of Tennessee. He was a pretty refined guy. He was experienced. He rose up the ranks quick. I mean, you think he was drafted in 2023 and he debuted in 24. And everything would signal that might be a similar track to what Charlie Condon's going to do. We'll have to see where he gets put to start. But he seems like a guy who by next year might be in the majors. He might be at Coors Field by next year. And that's just very unusual for major league drafts, but it's something that's happening more and more because these college kids are bringing a really refined game to the minors now.
Well, yeah, and that's like, we've seen Air Force's own Paul Skeens. He was drafted 1 last year, and he's now starting the All-Star game. I mean, he's a different case, but it does seem like teams, and the Rockies have been like guilty of waiting too long to pull up their prospects, I think, at times.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to be the case as much anymore.
No, and that's what's great about some of these really mature hitters is they force you to bring them up. They're based on your scouting, based on what they're saying in these meetings. I mean, they don't know how quickly he's going to rise. They're going to have to get him in the system, see where he's at. I mean, you're talking about a dude who probably still has some growing to do even as a baseball player. He was a walk-on at Georgia, wasn't highly recruited. And then in, his final year, he goes bananas. And so you're talking about a guy who may still have a step forward that he can make. And he's already shown power that I mean, you're talking about a guy who brings probably top 5 power in their entire system from day one. That's the type of hitter this is. And so he should rise very quickly. And him and Chase Dolander, I mean, you're talking about back-to-back first-round picks who might debut on similar timelines.
And, I'm sure Rockies fans, I mean, what do you think he plays? Seems like he plays a lot of positions too. Like, did he play 5 at Georgia? Is that what I read?
Yeah, so he played the whole outfield, and then he played both infield corners. He's not the fastest guy in the world, and with where the Rockies system stacks up, they're really deep in the outfield, right? But I don't know why couldn't he be the future first baseman? I mean, Michael Toglia is obviously making quite the push right now, but Charlie Condon, I mean, you're talking about a guy who could be your long-term guy wherever you end up putting him. And if that ends up being in the outfield, I could see it. But I also think they have a pretty established outfield right now. And so he may move around, but they like that versatility. They already said last night, they said his bag's going to be full of a lot of gloves. He's not just going to have one. He's going to have a first base glove. He'll play third. He's going to play the outfield. I mean, look at Aaron Schunk. He was a third baseman in college. He's playing second now. He's playing some short. So I don't know that Condon's ever going to play short, but who knows? Ryan McMahon made the switch to second base. DJ LeMahieu was a big guy who played second base. I don't think it's impossible, but they have a lot of prospects at each position right now. And as a team, that's where you want to be. That's a problem the Orioles have right now, and it seems to be working out pretty well for them.
They also took 2 other guys yesterday, but pitcher out of Iowa, right? And then an outfielder out of Texas. Again, more college guys.
Yeah. But so Brody Brecht is the pitcher. He's out of Iowa. He was a 2-sport guy. So he played football at Iowa too. Okay. Changed to just playing baseball his final year. And he is just the ultimate. In some ways, he kind of reminds me of a high school pitcher in that he's very raw. He has all of the pitches you'd want. He has a wipeout slider that they really loved. He has a fastball that can touch triple digits. But he also led the nation in walks, and he walks guys at an insane rate. I think the stat I put out was he walked over 100 guys his final 2 years, and that was in, I think, like 155 innings. So he walks a lot of guys. That's going to be something they're going to have to refine. And I don't know that this is the organization that has shown that they can kind of turn a guy like that into a successful pitcher, but the stuff that you can't teach is there. The velocity's there, the slider's there. If they can refine him, he strikes me as more of a long-term reliever personally. I may be totally wrong. He may end up figuring it out, being a starter, but he strikes me as more of a reliever.
And then an outfielder, Jared Thomas out of Texas. I'm reading the scouting report on him on Bleacher Report that he has Cody Bellinger-esque defensive profile.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy, right? Because he played first, but he actually showed better in the outfield when he did play outfield. And he played center field, so it is kind of along that Bellinger track. When we talked to the front office last night, they brought up Charlie Blackmon, a young Charlie Blackmon, as kind of a comp for him. I mean, he's a lefty with really good contact skills, a little bit of power, a little bit of speed, not a ton of either. I think if anything, Jared Thomas out of Texas is a guy that really shows what this draft was. And it's not a very deep draft. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's a second round pick that I don't know, with the way their system currently stacks up, I don't know if this guy ever plays in the majors for the Rockies. I really don't know, because the profile he brings, they already have multiple guys that bring a better version of what he can do. So I'm not sure where he's going to end up stacking up, but the name Charlie Blackmon was thrown out there as a guy they comped him to. And Charlie Blackmon was a late bloomer. So who knows? Maybe this is a guy who is on the come up. He's already got the bat to ball skills, which if the Rockies need anything, it's some guys who could put the bat on the ball numerous times rather than guys that only hit homers. So I don't think it was the worst pick in the world, but if I was going to pick a hitter, I mean, you did have Tommy White from LSU, a guy who has shown to be a stud in the biggest games. And I don't know. I really liked him in that slot. But it's hard to project what even second round guys are going to be, much less first round guys.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, the MLB draft is insane because it's so many rounds. Yeah. And you're not, unless you get a pure freak like Paul Skeens is, you're not going to see these guys for a couple of years.
When even the top of that draft and the top of multiple drafts in the past, you've seen the differences, right? Skeens comes up, pitches right away. And he's been a top 10 arm since he came up in the entire league. But then you have Jackson Holiday who came up and he couldn't hit high pitches. And so he got demoted again. So you can follow many different paths. I think Jackson Holiday is going to be fine. Don't get me wrong. But most guys don't come up and succeed right away. And that's even guys that were as touted as could be. I mean, Jackson Holiday is about as clean of a prospect as you're going to find. And he even struggled. So it's so hard to predict.
So real quick before we move on to the actual current team, Chase Dollander was taken by the Rockies in last year's draft. He pitched in the futures game. How do you look?
Yeah, he battled a little bit of traffic, but what I liked is he came through. I mean, he's pitching against a lot of guys that are higher than him. And what I liked was he has two guys on base and he's going against Spencer Jones, who's one of the best prospects in the Yankees system. He's much further along. And he got him to line out and get the third out, scoreless first inning. Starting that game, that's a lot of pressure. So for him to throw a scoreless inning, and you know what? The Rockies did announce right after he's going to go up to Double-A Hartford for the second half. So he's coming up, and that's probably the last minor league level he's going to see. I do not see Chase Dollander ever pitching in Triple-A. So you are seeing him. I don't know if he can really pitch well in Double-A Hartford. You're seeing a guy that may push for an opening day rotation spot next year.
That's crazy. And I feel like Gabriel Hughes may have been on that track too until he got hurt.
Yep. Yeah, and that's what's unfortunate, right? He was part of that group of four guys. It was three minor leaguers and then Senzatella, who all got Tommy John at the same time last year. It just all came at once. And so he was the leader of that group, and they still see him as a pillar. If you ask, they say Dollander and Hughes are our pillars. But what's nice for them is you've had Sean Sullivan step up. You'd have Jack Mahoney. You have had Connor Van Scoy. You've had Carson Palmquist. You've had all these other arms that have elevated themselves without Hughes pitching. And so when Hughes comes back, he's kind of just going to get added to a pretty good bunch. I mean, my argument was that they should have taken Chase Burns last night. As soon as he was off the board, though, I totally understand taking Condon because there are some good pitchers in this system. I think Chase Burns would have brought something pretty unique to the system. But when he wasn't available, I totally understand taking the best hitter available. And the Rockies system is just getting better. I would expect Condon to either slot right behind Dollander in their prospects rankings or maybe right behind Amador. He's going to be a top 5 guy for them as soon as he gets added to the top 30.
So perfect Tommy John segue. Herman Marquez was back yesterday, threw 4 innings, 70 pitches, gave up some runs, walked 4 guys. But, it's good to see him back on the mound. And, I guess, what do you expect from him for the rest of the year? Just kind of get his feet back under him a little bit?
Yeah, yesterday he hit a wall. And Bud Black came up. He said it was happening in his rehab games, too. He was really good at first, and he's hitting a wall. And that's just a little bit of rust, right? He's still got to build up. But early on, you're talking he's struck out 3 of 4 to pass Jorge De La Rosa all time on the strikeout list. And he looked like old Herman. His pitches – what I noticed is he was just missing with a lot of his pitches, especially his low fastball. It was dropping just below the zone. And if he can just ratchet that up just an inch, that's a perfect pitcher's pitch. And so he looked a lot like old Herman. The curveball looked really good at times. So I would expect him to come out and kind of be pretty traditional Herman in the second half. He's going to hit some hurdles, just getting back in the swing of things. But I think there were 2 choices for the Rockies. Either they could bring him back right before the All-Star break and then give him the break to work on things, or hold him out to be on a regular schedule after the All-Star break. I think there was arguments to each side, but at least now he kind of knows what he's going to need to work on, and he'll get to lengthen out even more during the break. And so I think when he comes out of the break, you're going to see a guy that can go 85 pitches and can get deeper into games. His pitch count was a little lower in his first start back, but I think he showed a lot of what has made him kind of a fan favorite. He looked really good until he hit that wall, and that's when the walks came.
So a pretty weird series at Citi Field this weekend. A lot of power from the Rockies. And Michael Toglia is leading the charge. He leads the team in home runs with 16. He's still hitting 197. But he's kind of making a push to, be a part of this team's future now.
Yeah, and they have said part of the reason for Eleris Montero getting designated was Toglia. To just see, okay, we've seen what Montero brings to the table. We want to see what Toglia brings to the table. And what he brings is a lot of power. And he's shown that kind of forever. And when you think 16 of his 34 hits are home runs, almost half of his hit are homers, hits 3 yesterday. And so he helped the Rockies. They actually set a record for most in a 3-game series in franchise history with 12 home runs in 3 games. They set a season high on Friday with 4, and then they hit 6 yesterday. So the power is starting to come, and that's something they've really missed. And so I guess in some ways it's a little ironic that the best power hitter in the draft dropped to them the day they, set this record for their franchise of most homers in a 3-game series. So it's starting to come along. The power is starting to come, and they're going to need power, right? Because they're never going to be able to boast a pitching staff that's going to be even top 10 in the league. I really don't think they're going to be able to do that. But if they can hit for power and just have their pitchers outdoing the other starter, that's how the good Rockies teams of previous years have really succeeded.
I mean, who would have thought that him and Brenton Doyle would lead the team in home runs?
Yeah, Brenton Doyle is really shocking too. I mean, he kept hitting. What was really nice to see going into the break was Tovar hit 2 yesterday. So he started 0 for 30 in July. So he started with arguably one of his worst slumps of his entire career, and he kind of started to pull out of it, especially at the end of the month. Hits 2 homers in the final game, so you hope that sparks some confidence. Because when he's hitting with power, they're pretty dangerous at the top of the lineup there with Doyle, with Tovar, with Blackmon. The only thing that's unfortunate is that they've kind of lost Nolan Jones's power. They haven't been able to have him in there, and who knows what this lineup would look like if Nolan Jones was also kind of taking a step forward, similar to what Brenton Doyle's done.
Is there worry with Nolan Jones going back on the IL again?
I think there's I mean, it's hard to judge because I haven't gotten to talk to the team about it since he went on the IL again. But there has to be a little bit of worry because back injuries are not things that it's just hard to heal up, right? And so I think a little bit of it too. I mean, he was in the dugout, he was smiling, he looked okay. So maybe part of it was, hey, we're going into the All-Star break. We don't want to play you today, so let's bring up Bouchard. Let's send you to the IL. We'll bring you back after the All-Star break. So I don't know that it's overtly concerning, but we've talked about this a little bit. Cleveland didn't just give up on Nolan Jones for no reason. And injuries were a big part of why he just could never find his footing there. And so I'm not going to say that, last year was a fluke, but, even Nolan Jones has said, you know what, it's tough this year because last year looks fake. I mean, that's what it looks like to me. It looks like that wasn't real. And I don't know that that's true, but it definitely isn't the follow-up to a 2020 season that you were hoping to see. You were hoping to see, I don't know if he's going to be a 297 hitter like he was last year, but you were hoping to see some good at-bats. And I just don't know that he's really shown that this year. He's looked a little overwhelmed at the plate.
It just seems to be like one of those lost seasons for him where it's just not going to work. But I'm sure he knows this, like we've talked about. The one place Rockies have depth and talent is the outfield.
Yeah, and so in the grand scheme of things, if you're the Rockies, if for some reason Nolan Jones ends up not working out, and last year was the mirage, you have plenty of guys behind him. You have Zach Bean coming up. You have Yankees. You have Sterling Thompson, who could possibly play the outfield. It's kind of hard to figure out where he's going to be. Heck, if Charlie Condon rises quickly, there's another guy. You got Jordan Beck coming back. So they have a lot of outfielders in this system. So it's sad to say, but the pressure really is going to be on with Nolan Jones. And, this year you may just chalk it up to, he just could never get healthy. And when he was healthy, he was forced to have to basically catch up to major league pitching every single time he came back. That's really hard to do. If he comes out next year, though, and it isn't much better, I do think you start to get pretty concerned about maybe this guy really isn't part of our long-term plans. Maybe he's one of the guys you can have all the acclaim in the world, and there's been guys that have put up good seasons before, but there's a reason so few guys in the majors ever make it to 10 years. It is a really hard sport to make it to the majors in, and it's way harder to stay in the majors.
Well, let's talk about the greatest Rocky ever, and that's Todd Helton, who will be inducted in the Baseball Hall of Fame next weekend. He had some media availability this week. What Todd have to say?
Yeah, we got to talk to him this week, and it's really fun to talk to Todd at this point because you almost see, in some ways, you almost see a weight off his shoulders. And so he's able to talk about the Hall of Fame. He's able to talk about these things way more than before. I mean, before he really didn't want to talk about it. He said, I haven't made it yet. I don't know if I'm going to make it. I don't want to get ahead of myself until it's gone. And so I thought what was really interesting was, he brought up the things he's nervous about, right? He said, my speech, a little nervous, nothing too crazy. But he said, what I'm really nervous about, they do a big banquet with just the Hall of Famers the night before. And he said, I'm nervous to meet some of the guys that I grew up idolizing. I'm nervous to meet some of the best players in Major League history. And so I think that was really humanizing for Todd because he's very hard in his stature. He's a very straightforward guy. He's not much of a he's not much of a game player. He knows what his task is, and he always did it day in and day out. So to see him lighten up and say, I'm a little nervous to meet some of my heroes, I thought that was really humanizing for a guy that I think has kind of kept a wall in front of him just for pure sake of focusing on baseball.
What has he been doing with the organization? He's been working like with like him and Turtle and everybody's been working kind of with the farm system, right?
Yeah, and so we got to talk to him about that too because it was, I've talked to Hurdle about it this year. I've talked to Scott Oberg about it a little bit, similar roles, and they said, Todd has had to take a little bit of a step back with the Hall of Fame. He's just had so much going on this year, and so we got to asking about it, and he said, "Yeah, I haven't been able to do as much. I haven't been able to work with the minor leaguers as much this year." But it is something he plans to dive back into next year. It's just this year specifically with the Hall of Fame, it's just been tough for him to be into it. But he said, I love it. I love being around the game. I think it was really fun for him to be around guys like Jordan Beck, who when you watch Jordan Beck, he's very similar to Todd Helton. They share a lot of mannerisms. And so I think it's been really fun for him to get to reinvest himself in the organization. And it was a little rocky right after he got done with baseball, right? A little bit of legal trouble, stuff like that. But once he found baseball again, that's when he was able to kind of find his second life, I guess, in baseball. And that's been really cool to see. So he plans to up it again next year, but the Hall of Fame has kept him away from that role quite a bit this year.
And you'll be going to Cooperstown for that ceremony.
Yep. So I fly out on Friday to get out there, go out, see the parade, I've never been there. So I've heard it's kind of like going back in a time machine a little bit. Cooperstown is very old school. It's very, like I said, like you stepped in a time machine and went to the past. So that's going to be awesome. Getting to see Todd Helton. I was a big Adrian Beltre fan as well. I liked Joe Mauer as well growing up. So it's a pretty cool moment, I'd say, because those are three guys that I really watched a lot coming up. And so to see those three get inducted, and then you also have Jim Leland, who didn't have a long stint with the Rockies, but did have a stint with the Rockies. So, I guess in some ways you're going to add two more Rockies to the group, and it's going to be nice to see Larry Walker again. I don't think Peyton Manning's going to end up making it. I think he has a camp with Tennessee or something like that. So I don't think he's going to make it. So that was a little unfortunate, but there's going to be a ton of people there in support. Todd said that the Rockies are throwing him a little party. They said, hey, invite some people. I think he said the RSVP list was 40-ish, and I think he got over 100. So there's a lot of people really excited for Todd Helton.
What kind of what kind of group does the Rockies send? I mean, I'm sure Dick Monfort will be there probably, and but the Rockies play that day too.
Yeah, so that's going to be interesting, right? You're not going to have Bud Black there. You're not going to have, and anyway, that would probably be a little odd, but I would expect Clint Hurdle to be there. I would expect the Monforts to be there. Larry Walker will be there. He'll be surrounded by all the Hall of Famers. It wouldn't surprise me if there are some other teammates that he didn't bring up during the ceremony, because you think he played with some pretty legendary guys. So we'll have to kind of see. It's like I said, he's very nervous to meet guys he didn't play with, but I guarantee you there's going to be a lot of guys there, and I would expect the Monforts to be there. I would expect some of the scouting staff to be there. It wouldn't surprise me if Vinny gets. Yeah, I would expect a guy like Matt Holliday to be there. I think Brad Hopp is going to be there. I believe him and Todd Helton own a ranch, I think, in Texas. So there's going to be a lot of old Rockies. Spilly will probably be there, I would think. So there will be some old Rockies there.
So real quick before we go, as the Rockies head into the second half, this second half is pretty much, it's going to be young players galore. We're going to see a lot of guys in this second half.
The whole wave of young guys has only just started, and the trade deadline is going to determine a lot of that, right? You may have some rotation spots open up if you have Gomber and Cal both get traded. who knows? Maybe Carson Palmquist comes up. The assumption has been he might work out of the bullpen, but I mean, he's been awesome as a starter in the minors this year. So wouldn't surprise me if he comes up to take one of the spots. You're going to see Adael Amador. I would almost guarantee it the second half. I would expect Zach Bean to debut. Jordan Beck should be back pretty quick after the All-Star break. So he'll kind of get to resume where he left off. And, you know, Drew Romo, if Elias Diaz gets traded, I'd expect Drew Romo to debut this year. So ton of things to look forward as far as guys coming up. If you're a person who's attached to the veterans, it's going to be a hard second half of the year for you. I'll just put that out there.
Are people attached to the veterans? I don't know.
I wouldn't think so, but you know, you are going to see Charlie Blackmon. They're going to continue to monitor his at bats just like they have the early part of the year. I mean, aggravated the hammy a little bit right before the break, but came back, hit back-to-back home runs. So it'll be good for him to get off his feet for the All-Star break. But yeah, it's whatever veterans you are attached to. It's especially Charlie Blackmon. I would really cherish these last couple months because I don't know that anyone has a grasp on what's going to happen next year. So, you know, I just would not take this year for granted with Charlie.
So home run derby is tonight. Then Ryan McMahon will play in the All-Star game on Tuesday.
Yep.
You know, I mean, it's a busy week, even though the Rockies aren't playing. I mean, there's still, and you're going to have coverage of the draft as well. So you'll have plenty of stuff coming up this week.
Yeah, and we haven't gotten to talk to Charlie Condon today, so it wouldn't surprise, or I guess we didn't get to talk to him yesterday. It wouldn't surprise me if we get to talk to him today. And so who knows, maybe look for the MLB Insider this week. It very well might be about Charlie Condon. So it'd be cool to get to talk to him, talk about, you know, I would think if you're a guy who just set a bunch of home run records in college, I would think getting drafted by Colorado isn't your worst nightmare. So
No.
I would think he'll be pretty happy, and you know, heck, he'll join Aaron Schunk as another dog on the roster. So
yeah, make sure to check out that stuff from Luke at denvergazette.com and his coverage from Cooperstown next weekend. And unfortunately, this will be Luke and my last podcast. Luke is moving on, so we will go from there. But I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate us talking baseball every Monday. I've really enjoyed it. I know that.
Yeah, for the people who've listened, I appreciate it. You know, I'm excited for what's coming next. But yeah, it was a blast to talk about the Rockies, even if the team, I guess, wasn't the best. But I like to think we found some positives through this podcast at times.
I think you and I were the most let's get excited about the future duo, because we always talked about the prospects and stuff. So that's been fun. But Luke is with us for about another week or so. So make sure to check out all his stuff at denvergazette.com. Subscribe to this podcast on Apple or on Spotify. And Luke, you know, good luck with everything, and we'll talk to you again.
Sounds good.